Welcome to Evolve with the Modern Caveman.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Welcome to Evolve with the Modern Caveman. I'm your host, Gilbert Diaz, aka the Modern Caveman. We have a great show prepared for you today. If you tuned into last week's episode, I announced that in honor of Men's Mental Health Month, I decided to dedicate last week's episode and this week's episode to focusing on mental health, particularly amongst men, and more specifically around the topic of depression. Now, if you are a woman who is tuning into this episode, rest assured, the things that we discuss on this episode can be applied to your life just as much as it could be applied to men. Mental health is, in general, is often a very sensitive topic that is not talked about enough, especially amongst men. In last week's episode, I shared my own personal journey with mental health and my struggles with depression and suicide. Now, I cannot begin to tell you how many people I've spoken to over the years that have confided in me that they too struggle with overcoming the darkness of depression and suicide, particularly amongst men. I was surprised how many men suffer in silence simply because they fear appearing weak and struggle to find that support system amongst their peers. I remember speaking once to someone about depression, and luckily for them, they did not suffer from it. But due to their lack of personal knowledge, they had a hard time understanding the struggle that many men and women go through. And according to their own words, because they could not understand the struggle, uh, they felt like someone, the feeling that they had was that when someone was going through depressing thoughts or suicidal thoughts, they wanted to smack the senses back into the person who was struggling. Now, I am a believer that we are all products of our own choices. And if we want to live rich and fulfilled lives, we must make choices that serve us. And as someone who fought on the mental battlefield, I can personally attest that for someone who is struggling with mental health issues, it is not as easy or as simple as black and white. In fact, I love how NFL insider Jay Glazer describes his own fight with depression in his book Unbreakable. How I turn depression and anxiety into motivation, and you can too. This is a book that I highly, highly recommend. It's a great book. I highly recommend it to anyone who is currently struggling with depression and anxiety. And in his book, he eloquently describes living with depression as living in the gray. It is perhaps one of the best descriptions, in my opinion, of what it looks like from the eyes of those who are struggling, what depression looks like from the eyes of those who are struggling. I can't tell you how many times that myself found myself living in the gray, where choices that appear to be common sense seem too difficult to make or even comprehend. Have you ever wondered why someone could be in the happiest places with the very best support systems and have all their wants and needs provided for them and still be unhappy? This is a prime example of someone who is living in the gray. Theologically, this person should be happy, but they irrationally cannot bring themselves to accept joy. In the gray, the person's mind perceives right and wrong choices without reason and has trouble comprehending the world that exists outside of the gray. It is not until coming out of the gray that their minds see the world more clearly and are able to make rational decisions. It is why someone who is in the midst of a bout of depression has trouble recognizing the love and support of others around them, and may even consider making irrational decisions like hurting themselves or taking their own lives. For for those who do not understand it, consider yourselves lucky and consider yourselves blessed. Understand that this isn't as simple as smacking reality back into a person. When someone is struggling with mental health issues like depression and anxiety, oftentimes they become blinded to reality. And the appropriate answer isn't to become frustrated or angry with them, but to encourage them by validating their current emotional state and patiently helping them navigate out of the gray. Good choices and decisions can only be made with a clear and sound mind. So do not expect that these people will behave rationally while they are currently in the gray. Helping someone navigate outside of this state requires a great degree of patience, empathy, and love. Remind the person who is suffering of their strength and compliment them when they exhibit it. If you find yourself at any time in a dire situation, unsafe situation, never hesitate to contact the local authorities and professionals that can assist you and your loved one. Now, as you may recall from the previous episode, I consider depression to be my drug. If you haven't checked out last week's episode, I highly suggest that you do so. Um, I ended, yeah, I highly suggest that you do so. In fact, if you if you may, I will even go as far as to say, uh, stop stop where you're at, go back to last week's episode, watch it, because the stuff that we discussed in last week's episode will make a lot more sense in this episode. Um, I ended that episode by making a choice that I would m- take back my life by finding a reason each day to keep living, by finding each day to keep breathing. But like any drug, there's always the possibility of relapse. And now in this episode, I'm going to share with you how I relapsed almost 10 years later and how I managed to work my way out and finally kick that toxic habit for good. But before I do that, I want to remind you, the listener, that if you are currently struggling with suicidal thoughts and depression, do not hesitate to contact the suicide prevention hotline. They have now made it even easier than ever by reducing the hotline down to three very simple numbers: 988. 988. Dial this number if you need help. Now back to the show. For nearly 10 years, I was faithful in curbing my depressing habits. I did as I promised. Every day, I searched for a reason to be happy. I searched for a reason to keep living. I searched for a reason to keep breathing. And I held on to that, and I was very successful. Now, throughout the course of those 10 years, a lot there was a lot of things that was presented in my life that assisted me in finding my happiness. I had three beautiful children. I lived in a good, safe home, and I was fairly financially stable. Now, the whole 10 years weren't all sunshine and roses. In fact, some of the greatest challenges that I experienced happened within those 10 years. We faced many challenges very that threatened to pull me back into that darkness, threatened to pull me back into the gray. In the midst of those 10 years, I remember we lost our apartment. We were homeless for a little bit. We ended up on food stamps, and our two sons were diagnosed with autism. and we had to try to navigate those challenges. But just as my father had taught me, my will to keep fighting was greater than the temptation to give up. And I was able to navigate out of it every single time. Throughout it all, I definitely had some moments of I guess momentary sadness, momentary fear and anxiety, but I chose not to entertain it, and I kept pushing forward. Things began to shift one day, however, when I read an article about a pastor who had lost his battle with depression, and he had taken his own life after years of successfully curbing it and building an organization that helped others do the same. I remember after reading that article, just crying my eyes out. I didn't know the man, but I understood his pain and I sympathized with him. Then this random thought crept into my mind. If he couldn't beat it, after years of successfully battling depression, what makes you think that you will? Now, comparison is the thief of joy, and doubt is the seed of deception. And it was my first step backwards. A few months later, a second event completely shook me to my core. My son's former kindergarten teacher took her own life. Now, she was a absolutely beautiful soul, and she cared very deeply for my son and his special needs. She had this smile, and I know a lot of people have described, their loved ones this way, but she really did have this smile that just lit up a room. She was loving and sweet. She was an excellent teacher. And the crazy thing is that when you picture depression, when you picture suicide, and you looked at her, she didn't fit the mold. She didn't fit the kind of person that you would think would take their own life. The picture just didn't match. When she took her life, suddenly I was reminded for a second time of my own battles, and I questioned if I could survive this time. I cried for days after her passing just because just as the pastor that I read about, I recognized her pain. I remember speaking with someone one day who didn't understand why she could take her own life and explaining to them that in the darkness, in the gray, you can become blinded to the truth. You can become blinded to reality. I remember as I was explaining it, I felt the familiar presence of my old friend, that same darkness creeping back into my life. So I decided to be proactive and try to stop it from going any further. I started going to the gym. I started eating healthier. I started occupying my mind with better things. I was more involved in my church. Um, I became disciplined and I lost an insanely 35 pounds in the course of 3 to 4 months. Then 3 months later, the world shut down. COVID happened. And suddenly, I had a lot of time to entertain my old friend. I had a lot of time to entertain the gray. He constantly reminded me of my unresolved insecurities, and he exploited my shame. He sowed doubt into everything that I loved, and I watered it with my thoughts. I stopped fighting for my reasons to be happy and found myself back on the hamster wheel of depression. I found myself revisiting my past failures, comparing myself to others, doubting my self worth, becoming deeply saddened by things that I had no control over, and allowing unresolved issues to bleed into my life. I desperately tried to find a way out, even going as far as buying a dog to keep my mind distracted. But even that didn't help. I was sinking again, this time faster than ever. Now, this time around, my kids played a very crucial role. They were a big factor in why I couldn't take my life. I didn't want to leave them without a father. But the truth was, in secret, I often fantasized about dying again. I would wrap a belt around my neck to just feel the tension. I would take sharp objects and scrape it against my skin to feel some kind of relief in the pain. And perhaps in the worst of it, I would beat myself in the shower. I would pull my hair, I would scratch my face. I even hoped that I would go outside and catch COVID from someone and that I wouldn't be one of the fortunate ones and I would die. I was killing myself, but this time I was doing it from within. Then one day, one of my sons was having uh, a meltdown, and I overheard him calling himself stupid, horrible. He said that he was bad. I remember him downplaying all his accomplishments. He was very, very negative, and I couldn't understand where he was getting any of this from. Because throughout it all, throughout this entire time, over the course of perhaps a year and a half, 2 years, the same as last time, uh, my wife had to carry the burden, and she was there picking up the pieces, shielding my struggles from my kids. But still, my demeanor was unavoidable to their sight, no matter how much she tried. And I remember one day I had this sudden vision in my mind that my sons and my daughter will learn these terrible toxic habits and they too will suffer just like I did. I even went as far as envisioning myself crying at their funeral because they took their own lives. All because their biggest example, their father, couldn't show them a better way, couldn't lead them down a better path. I decided that I needed to change this time for good, once and for all. I remember I didn't, when I was, this time around, when I was going through these terrible bouts, um, I didn't speak to no one about it. Only my wife knew about what I was going through. But I decided that I needed to reach out to two of my best friends, and I confided in them. And to my surprise, they confided in me, and they too struggled with depression and even suicidal thoughts. We pledged on that day to hold each other accountable and be there for one another. And that was the day that the modern caveman was born. About 7 or 8 years prior, I was a film student for public access television. Now I'm probably dating myself. I don't think public access exists anymore. Um, I remember attending this award show, and it was such an amazing experience. You would think that everybody who was nominated for an Oscar. Everybody came out decked out in their finest outfits, and they were excited. We were all just we were ready to celebrate one another. Um, and while I was at that award show, I saw one of the shows that was nominated for best sports show. Now the show, when they played it on the screen, when they played the highlight on the screen, the show was very simple. It was four guys that were sitting around the round table. wearing sports jerseys, and they were just talking about sports. But it sparked an idea in me. I wanted to create a similar show with maybe 4 or 5 guys around a very similar round table, just talking crap and drinking beer, and it will all take place from the inside of their man cave. And mind you, this is all prior to podcasting. Podcasting wasn't even a very popular thing at the time. The host, in my mind, the host would be referred to as cavemen, and the show will be called The Cave. Now, you may recall, if some of you who've been following me for a while, my previous podcast show was called The Cave because of this. It would be kind of a modern take on uh the man show that existed years prior. Unfortunately, I could never get the show off the ground, and I shelved the idea multiple times. Later, I even considered publishing it as a men's lifestyle magazine or a blog and calling it The Modern Caveman. But there was just something about it that just didn't resonate well with me. It just didn't sit right. But at that moment, when us three men pledged to one another to keep each other accountable, it suddenly dawned on me: we are the modern cavemen, supporting supporting and building a tribe and constantly evolving to become better men. I immediately started to educate myself in an effort to reprogram my mind. I started reading books, I started attending virtual seminars, purchasing courses, listening to podcasts. I studied human psychology, I studied human behavior, I studied personal development. I stopped reading or watching the news, and I relied on my support system when times got tough. And in the process, I learned several things that helped me to finally kick depression to the curb and set me on a path to help others do the same. Now, I'm not going to go too in depth into each of the things that I did throughout this journey, because I believe that many of these strategies deserves their own separate episodes that I will cover in future installments. But I will list some of the most important things that I have found help me in my journey to finally kick depression to the curb. Let me start by saying that that what I am about to share isn't clinical advice. This should not be applied as a substitute for clinical services administered by a trained medical professional. I am not a clinician, nor do I claim to be. I highly suggest that you do as I did and educate yourself thoroughly before implementing any strategy, not just the strategies that you learn here on this show. Also, understand that depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues may have other factors that can cause these symptoms to occur in your life, such as underlying medical issues like thyroid problems or low serotonin in the brain, side effects of medications that you may be taking or mixing medications. It could be a side effect of obesity or lack of exercise. It could be also a side effect of a bad diet. What I'm about to share are just simply just strategies that I have learned over the course of several years in my own healing, and I have further developed to share with others so that they can seek the freedom that I fortunately was able to find. Please seek out a medical professional if your symptoms worsen or become dangerous. Remember to dial the suicide prevention hotline at 988 if you are experiencing or considering suicidal thoughts. This is not a band aid or a one time, one size fits all solution, and it must be practiced on a daily and consistent basis in order to experience the best results. Feel free to apply any of these strategies and advice that I give on this show in combination with any others that you may learn on your own personal journey, and share them with others so that we can assist one another in battling mental health together. That being said, let's return to the show. First thing that I learned, and the thing that I applied to my life that radically changed my life for the better and has become the center of actually much of my teachings, is the concept of taking responsibility of your life. Like I said before, I'm not going to go too in depth in this episode because each of these strategies deserves perhaps their own episode. But the main idea regarding taking responsibility of your life is taking back ownership of it. The number one feeling I remember experiencing during my own battles with depression was this feeling that my life was outside of my control. Taking responsibility for your life means choosing to embrace all the elements of your life, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, and accepting what you can control and what you can't control. Also, while you can't control certain things in your life, like the weather or natural disasters or how people think, you can control how you respond to those things. And you can control how you respond to those things when they happen. Tony Robbins helped me realize that life doesn't happen to me, it happens for me. And what I experience is my choice to experience. Most people go through their lives reacting to life. And those reactions are committed on a subconscious level, leaving us with this feeling that we aren't in control. When we take responsibility for our lives, however, we take cognitive control of our behaviors, effectively allowing us to respond the way that we want, granting us the ability to respond. Respons- Responsibility for your life gives us back the power of how we shape our lives and allows us to direct them accordingly. Thus the the reason why it's called responsibility is your ability to respond. The second thing that I learned and applied in my life is that I needed a compelling future, a deep emotional reason to become the person that I was striving to become, a purpose. When we live our lives with a purpose, we are willing to persevere through the hard and difficult times because we have the hope of a greater tomorrow. It is this hope that fuels our journey and keeps us steady toward fulfilling our purpose. It is my belief that a depressing life, an anxious life, a fearful life is a life that lacks hope, is a life that lacks purpose. I believe that we were all created with greatness, and that greatness is revealed through the pursuit of our purpose, the unique reasons why you were created. When we don't walk in our purpose, we leave ourselves up for disappointment. Is often disappointment in disguise because we know that we were created for more, but we choose not to pursue it. Often I hear people say, I don't know what my purpose is. I believe that we lack purpose in our life because we overcomplicate what we believe our purpose should be. To understand your purpose, it is important to understand that your purpose isn't about what you can do for yourself, but rather what you can do for others. We may also have multiple purposes, completing a larger purpose in the process. If you lack purpose in your life, think about the type of person that you want to be and ask yourself, why is that important to you? Don't give yourself a generic answer either. Honestly seek a deep reason why achieving this is important to you. Now tie those emotions associated with that reason to the goal that you are trying to achieve. The more emotionally tied it is, the more hope you will generate to fuel your life. For me, the the thing that gave me purpose was I didn't want to cry over my children's caskets because they followed in my footsteps. I tied the emotions that I would feel to that outcome that I was trying to achieve. See, we tend to run from pain towards pleasure. And the emotional pain of seeing my kids in a casket that way keeps me from turning backwards. The third thing that I applied to my life was I stopped chasing happiness and instead started pursuing joy. Happiness is a temporary, fleeting emotion in response to a stimulus. Something has to happen in order for you to feel happy. Joy, on the other hand, joy is a state of being. One can be in a state of joy even while experiencing despair. Have you ever uh, seen someone who lost a loved one and they could be crying their eyes out. They could be in a momentary sadness, but they still have this joy in their heart. This is what joy does. It is a state of mind, it is a state of being. Joy is a choice and it must be fueled daily. The fourth thing that I applied to my life was, and this one was hard, was forgiveness. Forgiving myself for my own shortcomings and forgiving others for theirs. Now, doing this freed me of the anger that I was experiencing in my life, the resentment, the shame, the guilt. It relinquished the control that it had on my life, and it allowed me instead to choose the emotions that I wanted to replace it with. There is a quote that says, to some degree, resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person will die. The fifth thing that I applied to my life was instead of running from fear, I chose to dance with it by facing my unresolved insecurities head first. What I mean by this is I decided that fear will no longer dictate my life. I learned that fear breeds doubt, breeds deception, and deception creates chaos. When we run from fear, we give it control. When we dance with it, however, we take back control. We often leave traumatic issues uh we often we often leave traumatic issues and unresolved we often leave traumatic issues unresolved because we fear revisiting the emotional pain that it causes. But by leaving it unresolved, we leave it open to infect the rest of our lives, causing us further turmoil. When we finally resolve these issues, we give room for healing and a life that is much more abundant. I will tackle each of these things in more in depth in other future episodes. But applying these five things greatly improved the quality of my life and helped me curb depression once and for all. Like I said before, I have to practice this on a daily and consistent basis. I do get tempted from time to time to return to the darkness. That's my that that's my honest admission. And I occasionally experience small bouts of anxiety and sadness. But now I am able to choose my way out. Hopefully, you found value in what I shared today, and I hope that by applying these principles, you too can find the freedom that I found. Please remember that you are not alone. If you are currently dealing with depression or you know someone that is, you are not alone. Remind them that they are not alone. You are worthy of your peace. You are worthy of your happiness. Don't be afraid to seek help when you need it. Make a choice today to make a change and evolve into your best life. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share your thoughts and appreciation by liking, saving, and commenting on the episode and the content, excuse me, that resonates with you. Please share this with a friend, a family member, or anyone that you think can find that will find value in it. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Modern Caveman's Club. And remember to click the notification icon on your platform, your podcast platform of choice, and your social medias to stay up to date on the latest news and content that I post. Also, many have expressed interest in purchasing Modern Caveman and Evolve merchandise like the hat that I'm wearing. So stay tuned for further updates on that. As always, keep evolving the modern caveman way.